have been meeting in Brussels, trying to finalise a statement condemning the Libyan government's crackdown on protesters. Jackie Rowland has the latest from that meeting.
They came together to discuss recent events in North Africa. But inevitably, one topic dominated the agenda: Libya. European foreign ministers spoke largely with one voice when they condemned the use of violence against peaceful demonstrators.
We're extremely concerned by the events that are unfolding in Libya. We condemn the ongoing repression against demonstrators in Libya and deplore the violence and the death of civilians. We call for an immediate end to the use of force against protesters and for all parties to show restraint. Freedom of expression, the right for peaceful assembly, are human rights and fundamental freedoms for every human being and should be respected and protected. Those legitimate aspirations and the demands for people for reform should be addressed through a meaningful, open, Libyan-led dialogue.
The EU and the United States were criticised for being slow to pick up on the popular mood during the uprisings in Egypt and Tunisia. This time they are moving swiftly to demand an end to the bloodshed in Libya.
But Europe is also dependent on Libya. Italy gets 1/5 of its oil from Libyan wells, and Libyan cooperation is vital to combat illegal immigration into Europe.
This may explain why the Italians have struck a slightly different note from their other European partners.
I'm extremely concerned about the self-proclamation of the so-called Islamic Emirate of Benghazi. Would you imagine to have an Islamic Arab Emirates at the borders of Europe? This would be a really serious threat.
The Spanish foreign minister has spoken of evacuation plans for all EU citizens. And Britain has called on Libya to protect foreign nationals. But right now, Libya does not seem in the mood to listen to European demands or warnings.
Well, let's speak live now to Jackie in Brussels. Jackie, we've heard plenty of words of condemnation from various European ministers in the past few hours. But just how widespread is the agreement in Europe on how to deal with the latest events in Libya?
Well, I think really that the ministers are speaking with one voice, apart, as I mentioned in that report, apart from the slight reservations that the Italians have for their own specific concerns about immigration. But I think what we're seeing here really is Europe trying to show that it is in touch with what's happening in the neighbourhood after being accused of being rather out of touch or rather slow to catch on to the popular mood during the uprisings in Egypt and in Tunisia. So what we're seeing is very strongly worded statements, unanimous statements about condemning the bloodshed, condemning the use of violence against these unarmed protesters, and making it quite clear that the Libyan authorities should be respecting the right of the Libyan people to express their opinions and to gather peacefully in public places to make those opinions known.
Yeah, there's plenty of words being said about the human rights abuses that are happening in Libya at the moment. But it's a difficult balancing act, isn't it, for Europe? Because you mentioned it earlier in your report. Parts of Europe are pretty dependent on certain things in Libya. Not least oil, of course, but also the subject of immigration, because Libya has been quite helpful to Europe in trying to stem the flow of migrants into Europe.
What we're looking at here is realpolitik, a juggling act, if you like, or a balancing act between European values that the European Union is trying to assert here, and also the reality of business, the fact that Italy is a major oil exporter to Europe, exporting to Italy, Germany, Spain and France, pretty much in that order in terms of the size of the business, and also the whole question of immigration. Libya has a 2,000 kilometre sea border. That's a very long coast through which potentially small boats, illegal people traffickers could be trying to send African immigrants illegally to Europe. Also think of the long land frontiers which Libya has with, for example, Algeria, with Chad. I mean, these are potentially very porous borders, and if Libya doesn't cooperate with Europe in stemming that flow, then the whole of Europe, and of course Italy first of all, since it is at the front line, if you like, for immigration, will automatically feel the consequences of an uncontrolled flow of immigrants. So certainly Europe has an interest in cooperating in Libya, but it's also made it quite clear that certain values, and particularly an absolute rejection of violence, are not negotiable.
All right, Jackie Rowland with the latest there from Brussels. Thanks so much. Well, let's take you away from Europe and get some reaction now from the United States to the unrest in Libya. Jane Dutton is in our Washington Broadcast Centre. Jane.
Thanks, Felicity. Well, the White House says it's analysing Saif al-Islam Gaddafi's speech to assess the likelihood of democratic reform in the country. An administration official told AlJazeera Barack Obama is considering all appropriate actions. The US State Department, meanwhile, has ordered all non-emergency personnel to leave Libya. Our White House correspondent, Patty Culhane, joins me now for more on that. So, calling for Americans to leave, and yet very little, no word, rather, from Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. What do you make of that?
It is a bit unusual because we saw with Bahrain, President Obama got personally involved. He picked up the phone. He called the king. The only thing we've heard from President Obama was a statement on Friday where he included Yemen, Bahrain, and Libya, and he called for restraint, condolences to the victims, and asked the government to show respect for the universal rights of its people. But that's pretty much it. Now we're hearing from this advisor that the president is looking at all appropriate action. Well, what this could come down to is the U.S. doesn't have a whole lot of leverage there. They just don't feel that they do. There isn't a lot of funding that they can threaten to pull, and it is also a very big concern because of what this could mean for gas prices. So while we saw them take some actual actions with Bahrain, we're not going to see that with Libya, and we don't expect to see that today.
Gas prices. I mean, do you think this is what's going to turn opinion against him, or call for lead to greater calls? Because you've seen a massive hike, one of the biggest in 25 years.
One of the things that will get Americans mobile and moving is gas prices. That is the thing they care about, and that is what they'll see an actual impact, and that will impact the president. He got high marks for his handling of Egypt, but if people start going to fill up their tanks and it costs $10, $20 more each time, he will hear about it. That has got to be his biggest concern because he feels the economy is recovering. Nothing will put the brakes on an economic recovery faster than the price of a gallon of gas.
Talk us through the politics. We've got Senator Lindsey Graham basically saying that, you know, we want to see regime change in Iran and Libya, and then, you know, patting himself and US actions as far as Egypt and Bahrain is concerned. What sort of camp playing are we seeing here? Well,
it's been striking that the president really hasn't received any criticism for what he did in Egypt. And what you've seen this administration do very carefully is they've tried to turn all of the focus to the protests in Iran because they are allies with Bahrain. They do need Yemen. They do need Libya. So this is a concern for this administration. Now, they like to say publicly, we're handling this all the same. We don't think we should tell you what should happen in your country. But you are seeing a very different response. I think it is telling that you have this very harsh warning from the State Department. That travel warning said if you're going to leave, don't go out at night, and really try to hunker down if you're not going to get out of the country. We don't usually see that strong of a warning, but at the same time, you haven't seen the Secretary of State, you haven't seen the President. It could be because they really don't know what they can do in this case.
And they can't blame it on the holiday today either, can they?
Well,
thanks very much.
Thanks.
Okay, let's look a bit more detailed, take a bit more detailed look at the relationship between the United States and Libya. Libya was implicated in the 1986 bombing of a West Berlin disco, popular with US soldiers. 3 people were killed there. Then US President Ronald Reagan